Guys, how are you? As Michael said, my name's Deb. I am a registered nurse. I'm mainly an advocate in the background for patients. That's my love and passion. I do work with Queensland Health, but I also work in a couple of cannabis industries as well. I do have a bit of a slideshow that show that you're probably not going to be able to see too well because it's not really built for this, but what I do is basically advocate in the background for a wide range of patients, whether it be pure anxiety, chronic pain, cancer, just everyday sleep, or just even stress. We've had patients turn up for stress. So that's basically my background. I've been a founding member of another advocacy groups for patients. We do have challenges, as David said, with driving, all sorts of different barriers, you know, access, cost, you all know it. So I kind of work, I guess some of you might think on the dark side because I do work in a clinic with legal medicine. I do, however, know that we have so many great green market practitioners out there, and before 2016 when it changed, I kind of, I'm a bit nervy because, you know, I'm not really a public speaker, but I'm here for you guys. And before the legislation changed, I worked in the background with a lot of people Michael knew, a lot of people that you would know on social media who are really there just for patients. So what I do now that we've got legal medicine is I moved across from Queensland Health to work in that field so I can try and envisage and act on the change that we want to happen. It's a really large area of discrimination, a really large area of heartbreak. I've seen children discriminated against. I've seen children be resuscitated time and time again in ambulances with AEDs on board that would kill a camel, and they're 11. They've had diagnosis after diagnosis and their siblings resuscitate them while the ambulance is en route. They go to hospital and it's just diagnosis after diagnosis, more pills, more pills. But in the background, someone has said, hey, try cannabis, you know, and parents do that, whether rightly or wrongly. I'm not here to judge them, but they find benefit, and that's a fact. So what we did when legislation came is we just aimed to get as many people armed with knowledge and armed with, you know, I guess, the ability to overcome some of those barriers and advocate for themselves. So you can just flick through to the next slide. Basically, I just tried to let patients know, like with hospital and their own individual needs, to make sure that they speak up and let patients, let their clinicians know, let their specialists know that they're taking medicinal cannabis in the background, or recreational cannabis, or green market, or black market, whatever you want to talk about. So basically what we discuss at my consultations, we do an initial consultation. I expect that they'll be honest with me. It's no point if you're smoking 10 grams of weed a day and making your own oil, going across to the legal situation and then actually saying, I don't use it, because we're going to put you on a journey that's not right for you. We're going to put you on a journey that's going to start you maybe on a lower CBD when you've been making your own THC oil and you use that effectively. So you need to be honest with us. At your initial consultation, we'll discuss those health conditions. We will discuss what happens within your health regime, what needs you have, maybe what pharmaceuticals you're on. And trust me, when people talk about recreational and green market, I'm all for it, don't get me wrong, if it's just recreational. But if you are making it yourself and you want to treat yourself, be aware that it's not just a cannabis flower, it's not just that bud. Inside that particular flower are hundreds of compounds and terpenes and flavonoids that can interact with your medication. So like pharmaceuticals, CBD, THC oil, it is metabolised in your liver pathway. It is in a functional pathway, P450 pathway. That means it's going to interact with other medications. Cannabis oil goes through that same very pathway. So you might come across and say, you know, I've got high anxiety and a bit of stress and depression. I'm going to take citalopram, I take this, I take that. And you're smoking weed and cooking oil out in the background. But do you know what terpenes or what strains that flower is? So I'm not really here to nag or be judgmental. You do what you need to do, and patients out there will do it. All I'm here to say is there is a legal avenue. as long as you don't get cowboys. You know, you need to go to practitioners or find practitioners that really will give you education. You can flip on to the next one. That'll give you education around what you're taking. You don't want to just, you know, get something on board and not know what it's for. You know, there's medications out there that can be what we call a balanced medication. They might have CBD and THC in them. And you might have poor sleep, but you might have anxiety. If you cook up a balanced medication or get a practitioner that just gives you a balanced medication without going through your needs, you might find that you're actually taking it at bedtime to sleep, but you're up painting the ceiling or being creative or writing a novel because the CBD's uplifted you and it's given you that more clarity of thought, you know, more focus, more concentration when you're supposed to be in bed. So a blend wouldn't be right for you then. You know, you might need that maybe in microdoses through the day. And when we talk about microdosing, you need a practitioner that's going to explain to you when your medication comes, what you're going to do. Pharmacies don't always label everything correctly. So, you know, when you get your medication, it'll come with a little syringe. What do I do with it, people say? I've had messages on my nurse's page. They've been given a oral liquid that you put under your tongue and a liquid vaporiser with it because obviously their practitioner, whoever they had, wasn't very informative. So myself, these slides are basically about your own endocannabinoid system. So we all have an endocannabinoid system. So when we move across to cannabis medicine, all we're doing is interacting with that very natural endocannabinoid system that we have, or ECS you might hear it called. So we all have this internal homeostasis going on. These medicines that I'm talking about, they interact with that. So regardless if there's people in this audience, likely is, that have never tried cannabis ever, you still have natural endogenous cannabinoids. So you're making those endocannabinoids. There's 2AG, found in human breast milk. All babies, if they're attached to breast, they don't have a suckling response or a tongue reflex without 2AG, human breast milk. You know, anandamide helps with anxiety. We all know people who naturally they're effervescent and they're very active and they have no anxiety. They don't worry about things. The house could burn down and they're like, buy another one. Where they got the money or not doesn't worry them. That's anandamide, or that actual neurotransmitter pathway. These endocannabinoids, they actually have those same effects. But when you have assaults on your body, you know, not physical, people beating you up, but when you have those assaults where, you know, trauma, you know, traffic accidents, people at work that shit you off, you know, your anxiety can raise and your levels of those actual endocannabinoids can deplete over time. So when you take a basic CBD, you know, it can actually just reproduce that calmness, that clarity of thought, that stinky thinking can kind of dissipate. And you get, you know, and often hear from patients, you know, I can think. I can actually think and I've got more clarity. That's just basically CBD. Some people need a bit of THC in it to sleep. Now, THC does so many things. When we talk about medications and an interaction pathway, that's quite sedating, quite intoxicating or euphoric. What's high? A lot of patients say to me, I don't want to be high, I don't want any THC. Well, what's high, you know? Of course, if you take anything in abundance, you might get, you know, those adverse effects. But when you take things in moderation, which goes for anything, food, drink, anything, medicine, when you take it in a dosed manner, in a format that's been prescribed to you, you're going to see benefits, not derangement. But then when we go back to the recreational or the black market, when you're taking something that you're not sure is what it is or it's not consistent, you'll have 1 week of good symptom control. The following week it might be up and down again. That's because it's not consistent. When you have a controlled medication that's extracted in a process that's controlled, there's no other variables. If you want CBD, it's CBD. If you want a full spectrum, it's got those other minor cannabinoids in it. No high THC, but trace amounts. If you want a balance or a full, they're all things you need to talk about. When you're doing it on the side, you don't know really. Even if you're growing it yourself, I've had, you know, guys come across 40 years on the black market using beautiful flower that they've grown, but they've still said their consistent symptom relief has been with the legal product. They've actually jumped on a vaporiser instead of smoking a joint, having a scoop. They're now more safer, more healthier, and the law isn't looking at them as much. They're using less weed, if you want to call it that, and their symptoms are more consistently controlled. So, sleep, mood, appetite, memory, reproduction, fertility. Next slide, hon. Thank you. These are all things that it does. Basically, it's just another body system. You know, skeletal, respiratory, muscular, circulatory, they're all systems. Endocannabinoid system is one of the most important human body systems. You know, we wouldn't have all these internal functions. There's little receptors throughout our bodies. Cannabinoids or cannabinoid orals, they actually bind to these receptors throughout our bodies. We've got CB1, CB2, but we've also got minor receptors like little G protein receptors that sit in liver, in functionality like GPR 118. It helps with blood pressure. That's a minor receptor that people don't know about in this ECS window, under that umbrella. There's another one, you know, we have 119, internal metabolic and temperature control. We have insulin release control. You know, we have minor ones, serotonin receptors that, you know, release and help with anxiety. Those very, very high medications that you use to control nausea or sleep, antiemetics, things like that, they're all similar compounds scientifically released throughout your body that actually have or create or have cause on that internal homeostasis. And when that's depleted, life sucks. So we can add in a medication that can help with that. And when we talk about that P450 pathway, that's where I get concerned for little kiddies that are on a black market product, because they might be on a whole heap of AEAs as well that can interact. And you know, when you have pharmaceuticals in high amounts, you start adding in these natural alternatives. Like anything, you have to monitor. Liver function tests, you know, ELFTs, things like that, because these medications, when you add in, particularly CBD, not so much THC, you have immuno effects, you have medications that can increase their format or increase their possibilities of what they do, or deplete. So you might be thinking you're taking 100 milligrams or something, when in actual fact you're only getting 40. So do you understand what I mean about that internal homeostasis and the way that medications work? So yeah, basically that's how they work, they just interact. Next slide, sweetie. Thank you. Yeah, so it just keeps our internal functions working basically how we want it to work. Next one to go. So they're all the systems. I mean, have a look at that. How intense is that? That is just incredible that all of these functions are in that endocannabinoid system. That synaptic plasticity. When I talk about that neurotransmitter pathway, THC and neuropathic pain, you've got these pathways, if you can imagine it in layman's terms, like two little traffic lights in your head, gamma and glutamate, you know, red and green. Now pathways, pain pathways, they're firing them out, and your back aches and your knees ache and you're cranky, you know, endometriosis pain, Crohn's pain. These endocannabinoids or exogenous cannabinoids or external medications can actually interact with all these receptors in that pathway. So you've got gamma, you've got red traffic light, you've got green traffic light. They're firing crazy, not stopping you and going when you shouldn't be. That can break up that pathway, and it's basically like the 5-HT serotonin receptor. It's an end nerve receptor, so it's going to receive that signal, and it's going to help to break up those different signalling systems. So it'll help to correct that mismanaged traffic light system in your brain. So pain starts to reduce. Patients come back and say, they only come for anxiety, but God, my knees are better. I broke my knee in 1971 and it's like I'm jogging around the block. Older folk that are, you know, have loved their garden for years and they feed their chooks and they go to the grandkids, have stopped all that, cessation of everything, because they're cranky and they're old and they're crooked and they're, you know, and they start a bit of CBD, maybe even a full spectrum, you know, and some, a lot, progress up. If they're cannabis naive and start on a CBD, they will move up that. That's not an addiction. That just craps me off. It's not an addiction. That's finding the right product, finding the right journey for you. And as one of my most favourite nurses in the whole world says, we've all got feet, we don't wear the same shoes. So the journey's individual to you. You might use a high THC to sleep at night and a CBD for a little bit of anxiety, mood control, or even Crohn's inflammation. Someone else might use that same medication for a totally different reason. Someone else will come up to you and say, oh, don't use THC, it wiped me out. It might have wiped them out. They might have been really non-resistant to it. You might need a truckload. And speaking of truckloads, like patients can come, make sure that your consults are very credible people, because you'll be given formats of medication that will come in all different shapes and sizes, bottles and all different. I'll just pop this down for a second. And they'll send you out a syringe with some of your medications. And that's what you'll get. You might not get any other information about it. So we'll have a 1 ml syringe, or we might have like a pipette or something similar. So it's just a little pipette. So when they come out and you're cannabis naive, what do you say? Like, what do you do? How much do I draw up? What's a mil? You know, how much is it? 20 drops. I've had one lady who had a bit of anxiety, chronic pain, pick up her medication in her lunch break. I'd gone through extreme dosing education with her. Make sure you have 1 drop, 0.1 of a mil, 2 drops, 0.1 of a mil is 2 drops, and she thought 1 drop was the whole syringe. She was literally annihilated. It was THC. And my instructions were, start it at night on the weekend, get comfortable with the night dosing, 1 to 2 drops, and then wait an hour. See how you feel, monitor that, write it down. I had less pain, I slept better, I slept for 4 hours, I slept for 8. The next night, start that again. 2 drops did this, maybe 3 all did this. 3, 4 nights on, you've got a good routine of sleep. Then work on your day. Don't start it at lunchtime in your lunch break, because things can happen. I'm not saying you'll never die or overdose. Those receptors in your body, doesn't work on those. You know, you've got cardiothoracic centres that opioids, take too many, you'll die. You can overdose, you can withdraw, you can get addicted. Cannabinoids, not at all. You'll have symptom control if you stop taking it. It's excreted 60% in your faeces, 20% in your urine. So 12 hours later, she's gone. You'll still test positive though. That's the bad issue. That's the issue with the law and what David talked about. Do you want to flick on to the next one, sweet? Next one. Yeah, so the receptors are in there, they're viable, you've got the CB2 throughout everywhere. That's where that medicine makes that change. That's where you're going to see that benefit. So if you come across to the clinic, they're going to talk to you about that initial medication, what your needs are, they'll get that on board, and then they'll follow you up if they're a good clinic within a month or 6 weeks. That's not to take your money, that's to make sure you're on the right medication. And if you've been cannabis naive, and they start you on a CBD, don't just assume it's because they want to sell you that product. It might be the right terpenes in that product. As I said before, the cannabis flower, it's a tannin, it's a flower. It contains all of those different compounds. I've had patients come to me and say, stop taking my oil, I'm just smoking the flower now, because it tastes terrible. And I'm like, okay, but you've just told me that oil helped you sleep so well. Your anxiety was, there might be a school teacher, your anxiety was better, you're dealing with the children, everything's better, but you've stopped taking it. Yeah, it tastes terrible. Weigh up the benefit against the taste. If you're getting those benefits, don't worry about the taste. God, shove it in some food. It's still going to get in there. It's still going to take that same pathway and that metabolic pathway and process. It'll just take 10, 15 minutes longer because you put it in food. If you don't like it, just get it in there somehow. You can buy clear gelatin caps. People often use them for the law to circumnavigate that oral swab test. Just remember, that's terrific, and I do suggest that to my patients. I'll say, look, there might be fly in, fly out worker. They're on different night shifts all the time. Their sleep patterns are really deranged. I'll give them a bit of THC and they're really worried, And I say, well, look, one way to circumnavigate that is to get the clear gelatin caps. Get them from any pharmacy, $300 for $7. However, that's good and well, not going to touch your mucous membranes. You won't test positive in a tongue swab. But remember, it's going through your metabolic pathway. So let's just say, and hope it never happens, you had a big crash or you had something happen that involved insurance and you were actually taken to hospital and you were blood tested, you will test positive. They will screen for drugs and they will test you and you will test positive. So there's always a good and there's always a bad. So there's always a kick in the guts with cannabis, That's the bad thing about it. That's what I hate. And that's why I started this journey. Flick it on again. This is really more about science, and they're going to be really bad coming up soon because you won't be able to see them well. But it's basically just to show you what those functions are. If you've got inflammation, just cranky little bits of achiness, CBD can help you. I'm not saying it'll help everyone. I'm not saying it'll be the be-all, end-all. I'm not saying there's no place for pharmaceuticals, but what I am saying, it shouldn't be last line. It should be first line, because there's probably heaps of people in this audience that have had to try, large opioid amounts or large anxiolytics or even, you know, other medications that aren't too great for them. And they have their own adverse effects. Endone will block up your bowel. You know, other things will cause liver derangement. And I've seen people on dialysis, you know, kidney failure, all sorts of things going on because of overuse of pharmaceuticals. And they're really, really quick in the last 20 years to hand out opioids by the bucket loads. And then those poor buggers, they just said, oh, we've caused an addiction. We'll take that all away. But they didn't give them a replacement. The doctors, the most heard statement I heard was, I can't help you anymore. And they popped them out on the street. You know where a lot of those people ended up? Heroin addicted, opioid, buying it on the street, fentanyl. I've seen them ring out patches. Like, it's just really, really, really sad. And they could have been brought across to cannabis medicine. That could have been prevented. We have seen so many people reduce opioids, reduce alcohol. People come across for like degenerative spine, C5, you know, lower back pain, lumbar pain, shooting down their leg, and they come back 3 months later and they go, my GP said my diabetes levels are great. They've taken me, they've said I can be diet controlled. My you know, oral medications are gone because of that receptor pathway. Remember I said before, 55, and that insulin release. Like, it does help self-regulate. Once you can get your endocannabinoid system re-stabilised, you'll start to see benefits from there. And that's where a lot of people get discouraged. They either haven't got to the right product yet, or they don't kind of consider the science where this natural endocannabinoid system's been kicked in the gut for so long, it's down here. So 2 months of taking a CBD full spectrum bit of THC for pain brings you up slowly. That can take a couple of months to get you resurrected, and then you'll see ongoing benefits from there. And, you know, that is a process. Some people tell me, and they'll swear black and blue. I had a dude with shoulder replacements, you know, shoulder reconstruction, swears black and blue, that his THC oil and his CBD oil helped him in no other way, shape or form as the last knee reconstruction that he had. He couldn't believe it. Other ladies have said to me, second day, I felt better. I could tell you the funniest stories, like people that have come across for anxiety, and I've rung them for a follow-up. Hello, this is Deb here calling from such and such. My cat's dead, and I'm great. That was the funniest statement I ever heard. This woman literally screamed in my ear, my cat's dead, but I'm great. If that had happened before, I would be in the corner rocking. You ask my mum, my cat's dead. She was excited that a cat was dead, but not in that context, that she handled it. Anxiety her whole life. You know, in and out of psychs and psychologists as a child. That little bit of CBD created that shape and form that give her that clarity of thought to say, okay, she actually said to me, hand on heart, I'm going all. She said to me, you know, I know he was a good cat. I know he had a good life. 12 years I had him, she said. He had a good life. Now, she would never have put that together. Had she still been in her anxious state with her panic moments and heart palpitations, that would have overtaken everything. That flight-fight response, she would have been gone. She would have been in the corner rocking. CBD stopped that. There's one way. Exactly what I just said, these functions, they contribute to that. They kick in and help you to deal with these situations. Next slide, honey. So basically when we talk about, I guess, patient examples, we have, you know, we've had a 101-year-old, 97-year-old, we have children that their usual day structure would be attempting to go to school maybe once a week. The rest of that time they're very, very much deranged. They're throwing chairs at teachers on the days they are there. They're just not having acceptable quality of life. They'll start a CBD product after jumping through hoops, going to the GP, getting told, no, nothing. Go to a paediatric balks at it, and then they'll email a few people and get on a few advocacy groups and find someone that might help them. Then they'll get across, and then they'll start it, and it'll be morning and night, and mum will come back and say, you've given me Jeffrey back. No, I haven't. Cannabis did. Cannabis give Jeffrey back. She'll say, we couldn't start a morning without Jeffrey selecting every one of these siblings' clothes. And if they didn't want to wear what he wore, and an 8 and a 9 and a 12-year-old aren't going to listen to a 5-year-old, but if they didn't want to wear it, it was breakdown, and Jeffrey didn't go to school. The whole house was in hell. We didn't get to school till 11 o'clock. Now, the kids come out and go, this is what I'm wearing, and Jeffrey goes, sweet, goes to school. He doesn't care. It's like, it's not every day. I'm not here to say that's 100% every day, but the actual energy that I receive from the feedback from these patients just keeps me going on no sleep and just keep on advocating. So, you know, as I mentioned the chook pen before, the issue with the driving always affects our elderly. You know, they've retired, they've worked hard all their lives, they've paid their taxes, they want to enjoy their grandkids, they want to go to bingo, they want to go to the park. There's so many independent living facilities now. They live like kings, they're having a ball, now getting massages, and all of a sudden they're taking a bit of THC, maybe 3 drops at night to sleep, bit of CBD through the day. They might have 2 drops in the morning for inflammatory disorders, things like that. They might have 1 at lunch and 1 in the RV, but they're going to test positive and they're worried, and there's no talking to them about gel caps. They're on that old mindset. Their GP knows everything. They were lucky to get to us. You know, they have gone through that journey and they've discovered THC and the CBD, and they're now well. And someone at bingo said, "You're a criminal, you're driving." And that's it for them. The process is over. And so what do? Crying on the phone at a follow-up, "I have so many benefits, Deb, but I've got to stop. I can't risk it. I actually pick the grandkids up once a week now," and blah, blah, blah. And you know what's going to happen? The daughter's going to have to go back to sorting someone else out, because as soon as mum stops and gets it out of her system, remember I said excreted in urine and faeces in that pathway, she's going to have aching joints again. She's not going to have that finger grip. She's not, you know, it's just not going to be there for her. So that's basically what happens. Taking your medicine to hospital. If you do get legal, and I'm happy to talk to anyone after this, or when everyone's finished or whatever, about the process to even get to here, but taking your medicines to hospital, if you've got legal scripted medicines, take them. Advocate for yourself. It is an S4, S8 medication. I don't give a crap what place it is. Private, public, advocate for yourself and stand before those people and say, please get the team leader, please get the nurse unit manager, whatever the place is, ask for someone if they lock it away. I've seen them tip it down the sink. I've seen them send it home with family. I've had one recently. I can, hand on heart, say I ring a hospital at least once a week to not berate but educate. I get, first of all, the patient's nurse directly, and when she melts down and says I'm a lunatic, I ask her to get the team leader. If the team leader melts down and says I'm a lunatic, we go to the nurse unit manager. And I'll keep going. I don't give a shit. I will go to the top. But generally, the nurse is where it stops. And once I give her that bit of education and say, you're an AHPRA registered nurse, for Christ's sake, would you stop their Valium and their Endone? Or do you go up to the RMO and say, please chart this on the med chart? They take it 3 times a day. They bring in their bag of a truckload of meds. You notice the cannabis patients come in with nothing but a bottle, a couple of oils, maybe a blend and THC. Not maybe a couple of cardiac meds, because we don't want them to stop their meds, but keep in mind those receptors, they help with cardiac function. You know, they might increase your heart rate and BP in the first instance, but then it'll start to self-regulate. So, you know, the cannabis patients quite often roll in with very little compared to the others. And so what I say is take it. Patients I'll ring them and they're in hospital and they're follow-up. 100% swear they're in their follow-up and they're like, my nurse is right beside me, she is refusing to give it to me. And I'll say, well, pop her on. They don't want to talk to me. They think I'm some hillbilly from somewhere. And, you know, sometimes I do look like that. But I will still tell them, it's an S8, S4. You're an AHPRA registered nurse. You need to advocate for this patient. Please go and get the RMO. Please ask them to chart it. There's a label on there from a pharmacy, a real pharmacy and a real doctor and a real pharmacy name. And it's a registered script, TGA approved. You need to get that written up. This man has been, one person had months and months and months of reduced pharmaceuticals, improved pain relief, everything was working for him. Just happened to go off to hospital, was having like Holter monitor and stuff, just reassessments. Took his medication because he didn't want to give it up for the 4 days of sleep tests and all that. They took it off him and sent it home with his missus, and he did not want to stand up and say it's illegally prescribed. By the time I got to him, he had been fed Endone, he'd been fed diazepam to sleep, he was back on I think they'd even put him on pregabalin or something. It was ridiculous. And I'm like, no way, get your nurse. I phoned that afternoon. I had his wife go home, get his medication and bring it back in after discussion, and it was all written up on his med chart. I checked on him a few days later. Everything was great. Sleep was back to normal. It was starting to kick in. It is an instant response, but not in that instant. It's got to metabolise. So within a few days, his levels were coming back up again. It's a bit like mountain peaks and troughs. When you don't take your medication regularly, same with if you have some kind of hurt knee and you take Panadol. If you stop taking it, your pain levels are going to drop in those troughs. So when you take cannabinoids every day, regularly, you're going to stay up the top and you're going to float along the top of these mountain peaks and you're not going to fall in that trough. So we've kind of gone A to Z to B to G everywhere around today. It's just been all over the place. But if you take it and you prescribed it, David's already talked about those things in driving. There's, not much I can elaborate on what Dave said. He's just a bloody legend in that space. I'm also an ambassador for Drive Change, so we are working hard out there. We've got people down in the big place in Canberra at the moment in discussions with a lot of things. We've just had Medicinal Cannabis Awareness Week that's actually going to be approved, is on the table in Parliament. So just like your epilepsy days, which are all very important, Daffodil Day, Cancer Days, all those types of things, we will every year now have Medicinal Cannabis Awareness Week. Also, we've got a lot going on in the background with education. So I'm involved with United in Compassion. We do a lot of symposium work. We've got a big one in August this year. It is a paid event, unfortunately, but we do have concession on that. We have a lot of patients there and a lot of expert speakers. We've got some that I'm super excited about, especially with pregnancy and cannabinoids. We've had a lot of cases overseas where people have been, just recently, a social worker was pregnant and she was using cannabinoids as an antiemetic. She was actually taken away from her position and was criminally charged. She's just been reinstated, and they have now approved the use of those cannabinoids for what her condition that was using. In Australia, we've had train drivers that have been charged and stood down and effectively charged for... there was an accident on a track. Someone was unfortunately fatally hurt. This train driver was stood down. He happened to be using medicinal cannabis. He was not impaired. He fought it within those laws. And he won. He was reinstated. He got compensated. At the moment, our background, we've got a few lawyers and our advocacy group working with the unions at the moment into establishing a clear guideline about that. We're working with some fly-in, fly-out workers and a number of other established groups that are at risk. Everyone's at risk. But with these guys to try and get a precedence, because there's a number of companies out there, believe it or not, who are allowing patients to work and they're disregarding the cannabis screen. So they're drug testing them. When the cannabis comes up, they've got a letter from us that says that they're clearly legally prescribed. They know the onus is on them not to be impaired. Their work knows their work performance hasn't changed, hasn't deteriorated, nothing's wrong. They're not turning up stoned as a maggot or anything like that. They're just, everything's normal. So they're disregarding those cannabis screens. Then you've got someone else, the other day, clearly discriminated against. Been in the same company a number of years, had been promoted, had just that week been promoted to a salary position. The second they found out that she had legal cannabinoids, they knew, but it was never an official letter. Because she got a salary promotion, she thought she better put in that letter. She did. The very next day she was dismissed. Completely, sacked on the spot. No reason other than she submitted that she was legally prescribed. She'd verbally said it. So it's out there, it's rife. Proposed solutions, David's already talked about them. Do you want to pop the next one up? This guy, you all know Olivia Newton-John, or you most likely would. This guy, Johnny's thing, he helped her. People say cannabis didn't help her. That's crap. She wouldn't have been here as long as she did without cannabis. He is a particular genius and scientist. He knows about all different strains and all those terpenes and all those different things, like myrcene helps you sleep, different terpenes. He knew about them and he treated her with what he knew would help what she clinically had. We're all individuals. He knew what she needed and give her that extra time. It didn't create a cure for her. No, we're not here to say it does. But in some people, they do have that clear evidence. They do have MRIs. They do have tumour decreasing. They do have markers that show that. Our Crohn's patients, they'll come back and they are just completely no quality of life whatsoever. They can't go out. Their life revolves around a toilet all the time. They've got to be near one. They can't go to family functions. It takes them 4 hours to drive from Brisbane to Maroochydore because they need to stop 50 times. They'll come back and say they've just had their latest scopes. Polyps gone, redness gone, inflammation. The gastroenterologist is like, wow, keep doing what you're doing. It's clear inflammation reduction from CBD. It's a known inflammatory responder. That's what it does. Just like those neurotransmitter pathways before. They have those actual pathways that are there for a reason. No matter whether they've ever used cannabis, they're in there. They're always going to stay there. We just get depleted. Next one is just about this. I absolutely love it because, he's doing his best to stay healthy and keep his life safe. That's all I can suggest that you guys do. I'll be here for a few hours. If you want to chat about any, information about clinics or what you do, I do have a few booklets to give patients. I don't have many. I couldn't bring too many, but I have got a few. You can share them around. I've got a couple of different product information things. I'm completely cannabis company agnostic. They're just to show you guides because there's a lot of really good patient information in there. I've got a few product samples. Like, it's not just about oil or flour. There's salves, there's topicals, there's, you could have like a little gummy bear if you're not able to get that oil out of the bottle and you've got no family to help you. There's all different products out there and they have all got individual benefits, but then also there's always a but. It might not work for you, so I'm not here to say cannabis is the be-all end-all. I'm just here to say if anyone needs help, I'm always available. Send me an email. There's plenty of companies out there that'll help you. Make sure you pick yourself a real good one. There's lots of cowboys too. So, jump in that social media space and see what other people have got to say, but at the end of the day, make sure you just advocate for yourself. And if you are making medicine at home, maybe think again about what you're doing and try to get on that route because it's getting cheaper. We're going to get it PBS listed. And, just quickly, I'll tell you one story about a guy the other day who was coming for all sorts of symptoms and he was getting flour from us. And at the very end of that consult, and I'm a deep consultation, I'll go right into it, but at the very end of that consult, he said to me, Jesus, I'm getting fat. I put on about 17 kilos. I can't stand the butter. And I'm like, because he told me the mill he's using and he was just so deep and he just told me so much about it. And I said, I don't really understand. And he said, the cakes, I just can't keep making the cakes and I'm just getting so fat. And I'm like, dude, what are you doing? And he's like, well, I'm using my oil. I hate smoking. I'm completely against it. It's horrible. But he'd just been saying about his, his mills and how much flour he'd use and all of that type of stuff. He had an oil. I just didn't understand his equation of the flour. And I said, are you decarbing that flour and turning it into more oil? He said, yeah, absolutely. And I said, God, I can give you a THC oil. He had CBD. Why didn't he just didn't process it, And he was going through this big process and eating fatty cakes and butter. And he said he'd literally put on 70 kilos and his doctor was saying, what are you doing? And I said, he just couldn't believe it. He didn't think he'd eat cake again for a while. Hated butter. And he just was absolutely in love with me in that moment. But I just thought that's how bad it is for information out there. You will be left kind of by the sideway if you get a company that doesn't explain things to you or doesn't. And by the way, he wasn't our initial patient. He come from another very large company. So I don't know how he got to that state before there, but when I got to him, we certainly sorted him out and got him more oral. Any questions before I jump off? No? Yeah, go for it.
Just got a question about, I heard that THCA is good for reducing tumours, is that true?
Well, THCA is non-activated, so if you want to look at that responder or that prolific bactericidal response for tumour cells, I would suggest you have an activated product. There is some research out there on it, but I don't know a great deal about that in the tumour responder. A lot of people do use non-activated. How you get that, it's not something that's really available in the legal scene. I think there are probably some situations where you can get it out there. But as for the science behind it, I'd say that you probably really need a product that's, what we said before, decarb, like activated. You get that around 102 degrees. So if it's raw, then you're not going to see those benefits, I don't think. But a lot of people use the plant as a raw product. Absolutely, I'm not saying there's not benefits. Raw, eating the flower, eating the leaf, it's really good medicinally and for that ECS, your own internal. But tumour is a different, cancer is a different. You need... and once again, there's research and antidotal out there. It is bactericidal. It can break up the cancer cells and it'll leave the other cells alone. Whereas there's a lot of other treatments around that just attack everything because their main aim is to kill it. But when it comes to THC and CBD used in first of all, quite larger doses of both of those products, and then once you start to see those effects or you go back and there's a bit of reduction, you can use that prophylactic. But my advice clinically would be, if you've used it and you've seen that and you've seen that evidence for you, don't stop. Don't stop. Keep it up prophylactically. I can tell you of, if you want to hear it, a personal experience just recently where I had a friend who had esophageal cancer. And we got him legal and we got him on good products for nearly 2 years and he was in remission. And I did beg him to follow the science and keep up a little bit of dosing just in the background, and that friggin' driving law come in again. He was in remission for 2 years. He went back to bus driving. This was in Queensland because he loved his job, he loved his life. He was back to who he was. He was back to good old land, you know. Life was good. And so he went back to bus driving and stopped it completely because they're tested. And, you know, it was probably 6-7 months before they called me into palliative care. And, you know, we buried him a few months ago. So in that case, you know, that's where I think you need that background. But that's just my personal opinion. There's a lot of stuff out there.
I do. I just want to say that I've actually been taking THC and CBD for about 5 years. And in May this year, I've had breast cancer as well as brain tumour. My CA15.3, which are the cancer markers for breast cancer, started to go up. They were sitting around 8, 10 for quite a while. Then they went to 30. I run a cancer support group, so I've done a lot of reading. And apparently the worry line is around 30 on this particular blood test. So it got to 38 and I rang the breast surgeon. She said, don't worry. You might have had the flu or shingles or something's going on, don't worry.
But you knew.
But I thought, I do worry because they weren't that high before. And I happened to went up to the symposium, the cannabis symposium, and talking to one of the ladies there, and she said, what dose are you on? And I said, well, actually, I'm just on the maintenance dose. She said, no, you need to go back. So when I initially started, I took 1 drop of a night for a couple of nights, then 2 drops, 3 drops, and so on, until I got up to 6 drops. And one night I made a mistake and took 9 by mistake and ended up in the ambulance at the hospital because I've never taken illegal drugs, so I didn't know I was stoned. And the point is, so when I came back, I went back onto my original dose, gradually aced it up again. When I got up to the normal 6 drops that I was on for 3 gram, I went and had a blood test about 2 weeks later, and I was back down to 8. So for me personally, I can't say that would work for everyone, but for me personally, I was taking the CBD of a morning and the THC of a night, but not the A. For me, it's proven to me that it's working because I was taking it for recurrence. I don't have pain, I don't have nausea, but I spoke to Teresa Taupik here about 6 years ago, and she'd had breast cancer, and she said you have to have the THC and the CBD. So I followed that, and I'm happy to say 6.5 years down the track, I'm still here, doing really well, and thank you very much for the THC and the CBD, because I believe that's why I'm here.
And I mean, that's, you know, I didn't pop Sandra in the audience either, so, I mean, that's clear. There's so many different, like that's just a CBD full spectrum, that's a high balance, 25-25, but you know, there's 12s, there's 10s, there's all over the place, and this one's just a straight THC. There's so many different medications that can help you, and what Sandra just said, she took too much and was clearly affected, you know, that can happen if you don't have a good practitioner or you don't get clear guidance. Okay, so that's really all that's about. Just, yeah, make sure you advocate. Thank you, and I'm so sorry about the nerves. I'm not really a public speaker. Thanks, guys.
Thanks heaps, Debbie.